They called her nothing. An orphan. A curse. No one cared if she lived or died. But one night, running from cruelty, she stumbled upon something buried in the forbidden bush, a flute, older than memory. When she put it to her lips, the sound that came out was not from this world. And whenever she played, the melody healed whatever sickness a person carried. A miracle. But miracles are never free, because the flute was not a gift. It was a cage, and something inside it was waking up. The harmattan wind carried red dust through the market square, and Tema swept it all away with nothing but a bundle of dried grass tied to a stick. She was 23 years old, and this was all she had known for as long as memory served her. The other women her age walked past with calabashes balanced on their heads, their waists wrapped in bright indigo cloth, their skin gleaming with shea butter. They laughed together, shared stories of husbands and courtship, planned naming ceremonies for children not yet born. Tema wore a faded brown wrapper that had belonged to someone's grandmother, and her skin was gray with the dust she swept every morning before the sun grew hot. No one knew where she had come from. The elders said she had been found as an infant beneath the iroko tree at the edge of the village, wrapped in nothing but banana leaves. No mother came forward. No father claimed her. The village raised her the way a village raises a stray dog, with scraps and indifference. She slept in a small hut behind the blacksmith's forge, a place so narrow she could touch both walls when she stretched her arms. At night, through the gaps in the thatch, she watched the stars and wondered if there was a place in the world where she belonged. The sky that morning was the color of old bronze, heavy with the promise of rain. The marketplace smelled of dried fish, fermented locust beans, and the sweat of bodies pressed too close together. Tema moved between the stalls like a shadow, invisible to everyone except when they needed the ground beneath their feet swept clean. Sometimes a trader would toss her a bruised yam or a piece of cassava bread so hard it could break teeth. She would nod her thanks and move on, her face carefully empty of expression. She had learned long ago not to hope for kindness. The trouble began just after midday, when the sun was at its highest and cruelest point in the sky. 3 young men, drunk on palm wine and boredom, decided that Tema made an easy target for their amusement. They knocked the broom from her hands, kicked dust into her face, and when she tried to walk away, they followed her, shouting words meant to humiliate. The marketplace watched and did nothing. This was how it had always been. Temeran. She ran past the outer compounds, past the yam barns and the sacred grove where the women poured libations on feast days. She ran until the voices behind her faded, and the only sound was her own ragged breathing and the wind moving through the elephant grass. When she finally stopped, her wrapper soaked with sweat, she realized she had crossed into the forbidden bush, the place where children were warned never to go, where the ancestors were said to walk at twilight, where old shrines crumbled into the earth and no one dared rebuild them. The rain came suddenly, as it often did in the wet season. Fat drops that turned the red earth into mud and made the leaves overhead hiss and tremble. Tema stumbled forward, looking for shelter, and that was when she saw it. A small structure half swallowed by vines and creeping roots, its walls made of clay that had been painted white a lifetime ago. The roof had collapsed on one side, and wildflowers grew where offerings had once been placed. She ducked inside, shivering, and pressed her back against the cold wall. The shrine smelled of damp earth and something else, something old and faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. Lightning flashed, and in that brief white light, Tema saw carvings on the walls, fish with human faces, women with rivers pouring from their hair, symbols she could not read but that made her skin prickle with unease. She closed her eyes and waited for the storm to pass. When she opened them again, she noticed her foot had disturbed something in the dirt floor. A corner of wood, smooth and dark, jutting up from the ground. Curious, she knelt and began to dig with her bare hands. The earth came away easily, as if it had been waiting for her. What she pulled free was a flute, no longer than her forearm, carved from a wood so black it seemed to drink the light. Its surface was covered in tiny markings, spirals and curves that hurt to look at too long. Tema turned it over in her hands. It was beautiful and wrong at the same time, like a song sung in a language she almost understood. She should have left it there. She should have buried it again and run back to the village. But the rain was still falling, and she was cold, and the flute felt warm against her palms. She brought it to her lips and blew. The sound that came out was not like any flute she had ever heard. It was low and mournful, a melody that seemed to wind through the rain and into the bones of the earth itself. It made her think of deep water, of rivers flowing in the dark beneath the world, of voices calling from places where the living should not go. She played without knowing the tune, her fingers finding the holes as if they had always known where to press. When the rain stopped, she slipped the flute into the folds of her wrapper and made her way back to the village. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tema walked slowly, tired from running and from the strange heaviness that had settled over her since she left the shrine. Without thinking, she brought the flute to her lips again and played that same low, winding melody as she walked the narrow path between the compounds. An old woman sat outside one of the huts, rocking back and forth, her eyes unfocused, her mouth moving in wordless muttering. Tema had seen her before. Everyone had. Mama Koya, they called her. She had been mad for 30 years, ever since the day she went to the river to fetch water and came back screaming about hands that tried to pull her under. Her family fed her and kept her clean, but no medicine man had been able to bring her mind back from wherever it had gone. As Tema's melody drifted past, Mama Koya stopped rocking. Her eyes cleared, sharp and present for the first time in 3 decades. She looked around as if waking from a long sleep, saw her daughter grinding pepper nearby, and called her name in a voice steady and whole. The daughter dropped the grinding stone and began to weep. Tema did not see it. She was already past the compound, still playing, the flute song trailing behind her like smoke. Further along the path, a man named Baba Suli sat on a stool outside his hut. He had not walked without support since a tree fell on his legs 5 dry seasons ago. His children had built him a sturdy walking stick, but even with it, every step was agony. The melody reached him, and something inside his broken bones shifted and realigned. He stood without thinking, without the stick, and took 3 steps forward. Then 5. Then 10. His wife came running from inside the hut, her hands over her mouth, unable to speak. By the time Tema reached her own small dwelling behind the forge, she was exhausted and hungry. She hid the flute beneath her sleeping mat, ate a piece of stale bread, and fell into a dreamless sleep, unaware that across the village, 2 families were on their knees giving thanks for miracles they could not explain. By the next evening, the whole village knew. Mama Koya's daughter had told the story to everyone who would listen. Her mother, mad for 30 years, had suddenly spoken with clarity the moment a strange flute melody drifted past their compound. Baba Suli's wife had done the same, describing how her husband had walked without pain for the first time since the accident. People began to whisper, to piece together the timing, to remember that Tema had been walking through the village at sunset, and some claimed they had heard music. The third healing confirmed it. A young woman named Zara, her body covered in sores that no medicine could touch, stood at the entrance to Tema's hut and begged her to play. Tema, confused and frightened by the attention, tried to refuse. But Zara fell to her knees, and her mother stood beside her with tears streaming down her face, and the small crowd that had gathered began to murmur and press closer. Tema took out the flute with trembling hands and played the only melody she knew. The sores on Zara's skin faded like mist burning off in the morning sun. Within moments, her flesh was smooth and whole, as if she had never been sick at all. The crowd erupted in shouts of praise and wonder. They lifted Tema onto their shoulders, called her blessed, touched the hem of her wrapper as if holiness might transfer through cloth. For the first time in her life, Tema was seen. For the first time, she mattered. After that moment, sick pilgrims looking for cure for their illness came from everywhere. Within 2 weeks, the area around Tema's hut had become a sprawling camp of the sick and desperate. They arrived from 7 different kingdoms, carried on mats or leaning on relatives, their bodies twisted by disease and injury and misfortune. Lepers with fingers rotted away to stumps. Women whose bellies bled month after month without stopping. Paralyzed men who had not moved their legs in years. Each morning, Tema would step outside and play the flute, and the melody would wash over the crowd like cool water. Bodies straightened, wounds closed, madness lifted like a fog. The people would weep and shout and press gifts into her hands. Yams, chickens, bolts of cloth, pieces of silver. Tema's hut, once bare and broken, now overflowed with offerings. The village elders, who had ignored her all her life, suddenly called her daughter and sister. They built her a larger hut with a proper roof and walls painted white. They gave her a place of honor at council meetings. When she walked through the marketplace now, people stepped aside and bowed their heads. Tema told herself this was real, that she had finally found her purpose, that the ancestors had chosen her for something good. But at night, alone in her new hut, she would hold the flute and feel the wrongness of it humming beneath the surface of the wood. It was too warm, too alive. Sometimes, in the dark, she thought she heard it breathing. The hunter's name was Goro, and he made his living tracking bush meat in the deep forest. He was a careful man, observant, the kind who noticed when the birds stopped singing or when animal tracks led somewhere unnatural. So when he began finding livestock slaughtered in ways that made no sense, he paid attention. The killings had started small. A chicken here, a goat there, throats torn open but the meat left untouched. Then it grew worse. Entire pens emptied in a single night, blood everywhere, claw marks on the wooden posts that looked almost human but not quite. The attacks always happened after midnight. And by dawn, there was never any trace of the killers except those strange marks and the smell of river water where no river ran. Goro decided to watch. He chose a compound near the edge of the village, where a family kept a small herd of goats. He climbed into a tree just after sunset and waited, his body still, his breathing slow. The moon was 3 days from full, fat and bright enough to cast shadows. Just past midnight, he saw them. They came from the direction of the healed people's camp, moving in a way that was wrong. Too smooth, too low to the ground, their bodies bent at angles that should have broken bone. Their eyes reflected the moonlight like animals, flat and empty. Goro recognized some of them. Mama Koya, who had been mad and was now whole. Baba Suloi, who had learned to walk again. Zara, whose skin had been covered in sores. And others, dozens of others, all the people Tema had healed with her flute. They moved as one, silent and hungry, and when they reached the goat pen, they tore into it with hands that had become claws and mouths that had become something else entirely. The goats screamed. The night filled with the wet sounds of feeding. By dawn, they were human again, walking back to their families with no memory of what they had done, their hands clean, their faces peaceful. Goro climbed down from the tree, his legs shaking, and went straight to the council of elders. The meeting was held in the chief's compound, under the ancient baobab tree where all serious matters were discussed. Goro told them what he had seen, his voice steady but his eyes haunted. The elders listened in silence, their faces grave. Some wanted to dismiss it as madness, but too many livestock had been killed, too many people had reported strange sounds at night, too many families had woken to find their relatives missing from their beds only to return at first light with no explanation. The chief, an old man named Udo whose face was marked with tribal scars, made the decision. They would summon Mama Dume, the blind seer who lived by the river and spoke with the ancestors. If anyone could understand what was happening, it would be her. Mama Dume arrived the next evening, led by her young apprentice. She was ancient, her hair completely white, her eyes covered by cataracts that looked like milk. She wore strings of cowrie shells around her neck and wrists, and when she walked, they clicked together like bones. The sound made people step back. She asked to be taken to the river, to the place where the women fetched water. The chief and the elders followed her, and Tema was brought as well, the flute still hidden in her wrapper. At the river's edge, Mama Dume knelt in the mud and placed both hands flat on the ground. She began to hum, a low sound that made the water ripple even though there was no wind. Then she went still. Her body went rigid, her head tilted back, her mouth open. When she spoke, the voice that came out was not her own. It was layered, multiple voices speaking as one, the voices of water and stone and things that had never been human. Ozobo, the voices said. The drowned one. The river goddess who fed on breath and blood to keep herself young. The ancestors sealed her in wood and buried her deep, but the seal was always meant to be temporary. Each time the flute is played, she grows stronger. Each person healed becomes part of her hoard, a body she can wear when the moon is high. The more who are healed, the more she feeds. Soon she will have enough strength to break free entirely, and when she does, the river will rise and swallow everything. Mama Dume collapsed. Her apprentice caught her, and when she woke, her own voice returned, weak and shaken. She told them the rest of what the ancestors had shown her. The flute could not be destroyed by ordinary means. It had to be shattered at the river's source, inside the sacred cave of Benibulu, where Ozobo had first been bound. And it had to be done under the full moon, when her power was at its peak. Tema felt the weight of it settle over her like a stone. This was her fault. She had brought the curse back into the world. She had healed people only to make them into monsters. That night, she tried to burn the flute. She built a fire outside her hut and threw the instrument into the flames. The wood screamed, a high, terrible sound that made dogs howl and children wake crying. The fire turned black, then went out completely, and when Tema searched the ashes the next morning, the flute was under her sleeping mat, untouched and waiting. A dying drummer named Chima had once been the finest musician in 7 kingdoms. Now he lay on a mat in his daughter's hut, his lungs filling with fluid, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He had maybe a week left, maybe less. When Tema came to him, desperate and afraid, he listened to her story with eyes that had seen too much and understood too well. The countersong, he whispered, his voice like dry leaves. Every melody has its opposite. Every spell has a word that unmakes it. But you will have to find it yourself. The flute will fight you. It will try to keep you playing the song that feeds Ozobo. You will have to be stronger than it is. For 3 days, Tema sat with Chima, and together they worked on the melody. He would hum a note, and she would try it on the flute, listening for the moment when the wood shuddered in her hands, when the markings on its surface seemed to writhe. Slowly, painfully, they built the countersong note by note, a melody that ran backward and upside down from Ozobo's tune, that cut against it like a blade against bone. On the 4th day, Chima died. His last breath was spent humming the final note Tema needed. The full moon rose on a night when the air was thick and hot, when even the insects seemed to hold their breath. The people who had been healed by the flute, more than 50 now, tied themselves to trees and posts, bound themselves with rope and leather, anything to keep from rising when the transformation came. Their families stood guard with torches and prayers. Tema walked alone toward the sacred cave of Benibulu. The path took her deep into the forest, past the forbidden shrine where she had found the flute, past the places where even hunters refused to go. The cave entrance was a mouth in the side of a hill, black and wet, with water trickling from somewhere deep inside. The sound of it was like whispering, like 1,000 voices talking all at once. She stepped inside. The cave walls gleamed with moisture, and strange blue fungi grew in patches, giving off a faint light. The air smelled of river silt and decay. Tema followed the sound of water, deeper and deeper, until the passage opened into a wide chamber where an underground stream flowed from a crack in the rock. And there, rising from the water, was Ozobo. She was beautiful and terrible. Her skin was the color of river stones, her hair moved like water weeds, and her eyes were black from edge to edge, no white at all. She smiled, and her teeth were sharp. "Little orphan," Ozobo said, her voice like water over rocks. "Little nobody. Did you think you could take what I gave you and then throw it away?" Tema raised the flute to her lips, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. Ozobo laughed. "Play for me," the goddess said. "Play the song that sets me free, and I will give you everything. A family, a name, a place in this world. I will make you a queen in my kingdom beneath the water, where you will never be alone again." And Tema saw it, a vision of herself dressed in coral and river pearls, surrounded by people who loved her, who needed her, who would never leave her behind. She saw children calling her mother, saw a man who looked at her with warmth, saw a home that was hers and only hers. It was everything she had ever wanted. Her fingers moved toward the holes on the flute, ready to play the melody Ozobo wanted. But then she thought of Mama Koya, bound to a tree, fighting against the beast inside her. She thought of Baba Suloi, weeping as his wife tied the ropes. She thought of all the people she had damned with her need to be needed. Tema closed her eyes and played the countersong. The sound was nothing like the healing melody. It was harsh and broken, a tune that cut and scraped, that made the cave walls shudder and cracks appear in the stone. Ozobo screamed and lunged forward, but the water around her began to boil, to steam, to pull her back. The flute vibrated in Tema's hands, burning hot, fighting her with every note. She played harder, pouring every breath she had into the melody. Even when her lungs began to burn, even when blood trickled from her nose and her vision went dark at the edges. The flute cracked. Once. Twice. Ozobo's scream became a roar, the water rising up in a wave that slammed Tema against the cave wall. But she kept playing. The final note left her lungs, and the flute shattered in her hands, splinters of black wood scattering across the stone floor. Ozobo's form dissolved into water, her scream echoing through the cave, through the river, through the earth itself, before fading into nothing. The underground stream went still. Across the village, the people tied to trees gasped as the beasts inside them collapsed and died. They slumped against their bonds, weak but whole, finally free. In the cave of Benibulu, Team tried to stand. Her legs would not hold him. She crawled to the cave entrance, pulled herself through the vines, and lay on the moss outside, looking up at the sky. The moon had set. The first pale light of dawn was touching the eastern horizon, turning the darkness to shades of pink and gold. She could not breathe. Her chest would not move. But she was smiling, because for the first time in her life, Team was not afraid of being alone. She had done something that mattered. She had been somebody. They found Team at dawn, slumped at the entrance to the cave, her breath shallow, her lips pale. She was barely clinging to life, but the faint smile on her face had not faded, as if, in her hardest moment, she had seen something good. The villagers lifted her gently, carried her back through the forest with reverence, and laid her in the finest hut, where the women bathed her feet and the elders sat vigil through the night. By the third day, her eyes opened. By the seventh, she walked again, though slowly, like someone returning from a very far country. She lived. And from that day forward, no one ever spoke her name with scorn. The same mouths that once called her orphan now called her daughter of the land. She swept the market no more, not because she was too proud, but because the village would not allow it. You have swept away a darkness greater than dust, they told her. Team grew old in that village. She never played the flute again, but sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would sit beneath the iroko tree where she had once been abandoned, and hum the melody of the countersong, soft and low, a sound that reminded the people of what had been saved, and what it had cost. And to this day, no one dares dig near the forgotten shrine in the forbidden bush, where the earth still remembers the goddess who was sealed away, and the orphan girl who gave everything, almost including giving her life, to keep her there.